The wreckage stretched for miles in every direction, twisted metal and shattered glass floating in the silence of space. Danny Reeves pulled his aging cargo hauler closer to what remained of the mining station, his instruments showing the same empty readings they had for the past 3 days. No life signs, no active power cores. Nothing worth the fuel he was burning to be here. He should have listened to the other scavengers back at the depot. They all said this place was cursed, that the energy readings were wrong somehow, that ships disappeared near the ruins. But Danny needed parts desperately, and beggars could not afford to be choosers. His hauler was held together by hope and spare wire at this point. The station had been caught between two alien empires fighting over territory. Neither side claimed responsibility for its destruction, and neither side cared enough to clean up the mess. That made it perfect for someone like Danny. Assuming he could find anything useful before his oxygen ran low, he suited up and crossed through the airlock into the debris field. His boots maglocked to a piece of hull plating as he made his way deeper into the ruins. The storage bays were his target. Mining stations always kept spare parts there, and if he was lucky, some of them might fit his hauler's ancient systems. The first 2 bays were completely destroyed, their contents scattered across space or melted beyond recognition. Danny checked his oxygen gauge and decided to try one more before heading back. Bay 3 looked more intact than the others. Its massive doors still partially closed. He squeezed through the gap and activated his suit lights. The bay was a mess of fallen shelving units and storage containers, but it was enclosed enough that some items might have survived. Danny began sorting through the wreckage, his trained eye spotting a few promising components. That was when he heard it, the sound that should not exist in the vacuum of space, transmitted through the metal he was standing on. Something alive, and it sounded distressed. Danny froze, his heart pounding. Every instinct screamed at him to leave immediately. Unknown life forms in abandoned stations meant danger, especially this far from human space. But the sound came again, weaker this time, and Danny found himself moving toward it despite his fear. Behind a collapsed shelving unit, wedged under a fallen support beam, something moved. Danny aimed his light at it and stopped breathing. The creature was small, maybe the size of a house cat, with scales that shimmered between blue and silver. It had 4 legs ending in tiny claws, wings folded tight against its body, and a long tail wrapped around itself. The head was distinctly reptilian, with a short snout and eyes that reflected his light with an inner glow. A dragon. Danny had never seen one in person, but he had seen enough GalaxyNet footage to recognize the species. They were dangerous, territorial, and existed far beyond human-controlled space. What was a hatchling doing here, trapped in the ruins of a human mining station? The creature made that sound again, a pitiful chirp that seemed to come from its chest. It was clearly injured, one wing bent at an odd angle, and judging by how thin it looked, it was starving. Danny knew he should leave. Dragons were protected by treaties older than human space travel. Getting involved with one, especially a juvenile, could bring down consequences he could not imagine. The smart thing to do was walk away and pretend he never saw it. The hatchling's eyes met his through his helmet visor. They were intelligent eyes, far too aware for any animal. They held pain and fear, but also a desperate kind of hope. Danny cursed under his breath and started moving the debris. The support beam was lighter in zero gravity, but it still took effort to shift it enough for the creature to crawl free. The hatchling stumbled as soon as it was clear, too weak to stand properly. Danny caught it on instinct, feeling the warmth of its body through his gloves. Back in his ship, Danny stared at the creature, now curled up in a corner of his cargo bay. He had rigged up a temporary enclosure using cargo netting and managed to equalize the pressure so he could remove his helmet. The air was stale but breathable. The hatchling watched him with those unervingly intelligent eyes. Danny pulled out one of his protein ration bars, broke off a piece, and held it out carefully. The creature sniffed it, then snatched it from his hand with surprising speed, devouring it in seconds. Danny offered another piece. And another. The hatchling ate 5 ration bars before finally settling down, its scales pulsing with a faint internal light that Danny interpreted as contentment. Just for a few days, Danny told it, though he had no idea if it could understand him. Just until you're strong enough to survive on your own. The creature made a small chirping sound, almost like a response. Danny ran a hand over his face, exhaustion finally catching up with him. He had come here looking for parts to fix his ship. Instead, he had found something infinitely more complicated. Somewhere across the galaxy, someone was probably looking for this creature. Someone powerful and dangerous, but that was a problem for tomorrow. Tonight, he had a tiny dragon to keep alive, and only enough rations left to last them both maybe 2 weeks if he was careful. The hatchling chirped again, softer this time, and Danny felt something in his chest tighten. He had been alone for so long, drifting between stations with no one waiting for him anywhere. This creature was just as alone as he was, just as lost. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I know how that feels." The hatchling's eyes drifted closed, finally feeling safe enough to sleep. Danny settled against the wall nearby, close enough to help if needed, but far enough to give the creature space. His rational mind told him this was a mistake that would probably get him killed. But his heart, the part of him that had kept him human despite years of isolation. 5 days had passed since Danny found the creature, and his entire routine had changed. He woke to the sound of small chirps from the cargo bay, a sound he had started calling Pip in his head because it reminded him of Bird from Earth documentaries. The name stuck, and soon he was using it out loud. Pip was healing faster than seemed possible. The bent wing had straightened itself within 2 days, and the hatchling had gained noticeable weight despite Danny rationing the food carefully between them. The scales glowed brighter now, shifting colors based on what Danny guessed was mood. Blue when calm, greenish when curious, and a warm amber when content. Danny had given up on the salvage operation. Every day, he told himself he would finish repairs and leave, and every day, he found another excuse to stay. Pip needed more time to heal. The parts he found were not quite right. One more day would not hurt. The truth was simpler and more complicated. He did not want to leave. Each morning, Danny would share breakfast with Pip, the hatchling perched on a storage crate while Danny sat cross-legged on the deck. He would talk about everything and nothing, about the colonies he had visited, the cargo runs that went wrong, the family he lost when their settlement failed 15 years ago. Pip listened. Not the way an animal listens, but really listened. The hatchling's head would tilt when Danny's voice changed tone, and those bright eyes would track every movement. Sometimes Pip would make small sounds that almost felt like responses. On the 6th day, something changed. Danny was trying to weld together 2 pieces of hull plating for his ship's damaged outer seal. The welding torch kept sputtering out, the cheap fuel cell nearly empty. He swore and threw the torch down in frustration. Pip, who had been watching from a safe distance, approached slowly. The hatchling looked at the pieces of metal, then at Danny, then back at the metal. Before Danny could react, Pip opened its small jaws and released a thin stream of flame. The metal pieces fused together perfectly. Danny stared. Pip looked up at him and made a sound that seemed almost proud. "Did you just help me?" Danny asked, his voice barely a whisper. Pip chirped and headbutted his leg gently. From that day on, they worked together. Pip could not do much with such small flames, but the precision was remarkable. The hatchling helped seal minor cracks, fuse wiring connections, and even warm up Danny's meals when the heating unit failed. In return, Danny shared everything he had, teaching Pip which parts of the ship were safe to touch and which to avoid. The loneliness that had been Danny's constant companion for years began to fade. He caught himself smiling more, talking more, even laughing when Pip tried to imitate the sounds of the ship's failing engines. But the outside world was not standing still. That on day 9, Danny picked up unusual scanner readings. Ships were entering the sector, big ones, with energy signatures he did not recognize. They were searching for something, running intensive scans on every piece of debris, every abandoned structure. Danny powered down all non-essential systems and waited in the dark. 3 vessels passed within a few hundred kilometers of his position, close enough that he could see them on visual. They were beautiful and terrifying, sleek hulls that seemed to be made of the same shimmering material as Pip's scales, dragon ships. Pip became agitated when the vessels appeared, making distress sounds Danny had never heard before. The hatchling's scales flashed between colors rapidly, and it pressed close to Danny as if seeking protection. "It's okay," Danny whispered, though his own heart was pounding. "They can't see us. We are just another piece of debris." The ships moved on, but Danny knew what it meant. Someone was looking for Pip. Someone with resources and technology far beyond anything humanity possessed. That night, Danny could not sleep. He sat in the cockpit, staring at his navigation display. His food supplies were nearly gone. 3 days left, maybe 4 if he really stretched it. His ship repairs were mostly complete, enough to limp to the nearest human station if he left now. But what about Pip? The hatchling was curled up in the cargo bay, sleeping peacefully for the first time since the ships appeared. It trusted him completely, this tiny creature that should have been terrifying but instead felt like family. Danny pulled up the station's damaged database, searching for any information about dragons. What he found made his blood run cold. Dragons are not just dangerous animals. They were an ancient civilization, powerful and isolated, with technology that made human achievements look primitive. They had treaties with dozens of species, all based on the same principle. Leave them alone, and they would leave you alone. Break that treaty, and entire fleets disappeared. And then he found the entry about the Dragon King, Ortax. The name alone carried warnings in 6 different languages. A being thousands of years old who had once destroyed a war fleet single-handedly when they entered dragon territory uninvited. The ruler of the Dragon Empire feared across the known galaxy. Danny zoomed in on the royal insignia described in the file. His hands started shaking. The pattern matched Pip's scales exactly. He was harboring the child of the most dangerous being in the galaxy. The ships searching the sector were not random patrols. They were looking for royalty, for the Dragon King's heir. Danny looked back at the cargo bay where Pip slept. The hatchling had rolled onto its back, wings spread out, completely vulnerable and trusting. It had no idea of the chaos its disappearance must have caused, the panic it had created. Danny had 2 choices. He could try to sneak away, leave Pip here with enough food to last a while, and hope the search parties found the hatchling before it starved. Or he could do something incredibly stupid and try to return Pip himself. The first option was safer, smarter. It gave him a chance to survive. But Danny thought about how Pip had looked at him when they first met, those desperate eyes seeking help. He thought about how the hatchling had learned to trust him, to help him, to consider him safe. He thought about what kind of person abandons someone who trusts them just to save their own skin. Danny pulled up a star chart and began plotting a course to the edge of dragon territory. His hands were steady now, his decision made. If he was going to die, at least it would be for the right reasons. At least he would know he tried to do the decent thing to in the cargo bay. Pip stirred and made a soft chirping sound in its sleep. Danny smiled despite everything. "Just you and me." The cargo hauler shuddered as it jumped to faster-than-light travel, its engines protesting every parsec of the journey. Danny had plotted the most direct route he could find to dragon territory, but even at maximum speed, it would take 6 days to reach the border. 6 days with food running out and a growing dragon hatchling to care for. Pip had changed dramatically in just 2 weeks. The creature was now the size of a large dog, its scales harder and brighter, its wings capable of carrying it around the cargo bay in short flights. The intelligence in those eyes had grown more obvious too. Pip understood commands, recognized tools, and seemed to grasp that they were going somewhere important. Danny spent most of his time talking to the hatchling, explaining what he was doing and why. He had no idea how much Pip understood, but it felt important to be honest. "Your family is looking for you," Danny said on the second day of the journey. "Those ships we saw, they were searching. Someone out there loves you enough to tear apart space looking for you." Pip tilted its head, scales shifting to a curious green. "I am taking you back to them. It is the right thing to do, even if it scares me." Danny paused, choosing his words carefully. "They might not understand that I was trying to help. They might think I took you on purpose. But I need you to know that I would never hurt you. You have been the best thing to happen to me in a long time." The hatchling moved closer and pressed its head against Danny's chest. The gesture was so clearly affectionate that Danny felt his throat tighten. He wrapped his arms around Pip, careful of the wings, and held on for a moment longer than necessary. On the third day, they picked up broadcasts on the emergency channels. Danny's translation software struggled with some of the languages, but the message was clear enough across all of them. The Dragon King had issued an ultimatum to humanity. 3 human colonies in the outer sectors have been surrounded by dragon warships. No one was allowed in or out. Ortax demanded the return of his child, and he was holding thousands of humans as collateral until the hatchling was found. The deadline was 10 days. Danny felt sick. He had been so focused on Pip's immediate needs that he had not considered the larger consequences. Thousands of people were trapped, their lives hanging in the balance, because he had decided to help a creature in need. "This is my fault," he whispered. Pip made a distressed sound and butted against his hand. Danny forced himself to think clearly. He was already on course for dragon territory. He just needed to get there faster, get past their defenses, and somehow convince them that this was all a misunderstanding. Simple. Absolutely impossible, but simple that he rerouted power from life support to the engines, accepting colder temperatures and thinner air in exchange for speed. Pip seemed unbothered by the changes, the hatchling's internal heat actually helping warm the cabin. On the fourth day, they crossed into disputed space, the buffer zone between human and dragon territories. Danny's sensors immediately lit up with warnings. Ships everywhere, both human and dragon, facing off in a tense standoff. A human patrol vessel hailed him. Danny considered ignoring it, but that would only make things worse. He accepted the connection. "Cargo hauler, identify yourself and state your business in this sector," a tired voice demanded. "This is Danny Reeves, independent hauler. I am heading to dragon territory." Silence. Then, "Are you insane? They're shooting anything that gets close to the border." "I know, but I have something they want. Something important. Unless you have the Dragon King's missing kid in your cargo bay, I suggest you turn around before you get yourself killed." Danny swallowed hard. "What if I did?" More silence. When the voice came back, it was sharp with tension. "Say that again." "I found a dragon hatchling 2 weeks ago, trapped in the ruins of Mining Station 17. I have been caring for it. I am bringing it back." The comm line exploded with multiple voices talking over each other. Command was shouted. Danny's ship was suddenly surrounded by human vessels, all weapons trained on him. "You're going to power down your ship right now and prepare to be boarded," the original voice commanded. "If you really have the hatchling, command needs to handle this immediately." "No," Danny said firmly. "Every minute we waste is a minute those colonies stay under threat. I'm going through, with or without your permission. We cannot let you do that. You could be lying. This could be a trick." Danny made a decision that was either brilliant or suicidal. He activated his external cameras and pointed one at the cargo bay, where Pip was clearly visible, scales glowing bright in the dim light. The hatchling looked directly at the camera and chirped. Every ship around him went silent. "Let him through," a new voice said over the comm, heavy with authority. "Clear a path to the border. Now, sir, the dragons will destroy him the moment he crosses. That is his choice to make. But if he is telling the truth, he might be the only thing standing between us and a war we cannot win. Let him through." The human ships pulled back, creating a corridor of empty space leading to the border. Danny took a deep breath and pushed his engines to maximum. "Thank you," he said over the comm. "Good luck, hauler. You are either the bravest person I have ever met or the dumbest. Either way, I hope you make it." The line cut off. Danny was alone again, with just Pip and the stars ahead. The dragon border was marked by a line of massive warships, each one capable of destroying his hauler with a single shot. Danny broadcast on all frequencies as he approached, his message simple and direct. "My name is Danny Reeves. I am a human, and I am unarmed. I have the Dragon King's child aboard my vessel. The hatchling is safe and healthy. I am requesting permission to return it to its family. Please do not shoot." He repeated the message 3 times. On the 4th repetition, his ship was seized by invisible forces. Tractor beams, far more powerful than anything human technology could produce, locked onto his hauler, and pulled it forward. Pip rushed to the window, scales flashing rapidly between colors. The hatchling made excited sounds, pressing against the glass. Danny watched as they were dragged toward the largest ship he had ever seen, a vessel that seemed to be carved from a single piece of black crystal. Lights moved inside it like veins of lava. "Well, little one," Danny said quietly, "I guess we are about to meet your father. Try to put in a good word for me, okay?" Pip looked back at him and chirped once. The sound somehow Danny's cargo hauler was pulled into a docking bay, so large it could have held 100 ships his size. The moment the tractor beam released him, armed guards surrounded the vessel. They were not dragons themselves, but members of species Danny did not recognize, all wearing armor that glowed with the same internal light as dragon scales. "Exit your vessel slowly," a voice commanded through his external speakers. "Keep your hands visible. Any sudden movements will result in immediate termination." Danny's legs shook as he walked down the ramp. A dozen weapons tracked his every step. Behind him, he heard Pip scrambling to follow, the hatchling's claws clicking on metal. "Stay back, little one," Danny said softly. "Let me handle this first." Pip ignored him completely, pushing past the stand between Danny and the guards. The hatchling's scales flared bright amber, and a low rumble came from its chest, a sound Danny had never heard before. It was protective, defensive. The guards stepped back, their weapons lowering slightly. "The hatchling has bonded with the human," one of them muttered in a language Danny's translator struggled with. "This complicates things." Danny was escorted through corridors of crystalline walls that seemed to pulse with inner light. Pip walked beside him, occasionally pressing against his leg, as if for reassurance. The deeper they went into the ship, the warmer it became, until Danny was sweating inside his clothes. They entered a massive chamber that took Danny's breath away. The ceiling stretched up so high it disappeared into darkness. Pillars of carved stone supported balconies where dozens of dragons perched, all sizes and colors, all watching with ancient eyes. The temperature here was almost unbearable. To the far end of the chamber, on a platform of black glass, lay the largest dragon Danny had ever imagined. Ortax was bigger than Danny's entire ship. His scales were polished obsidian, each one the size of a dinner plate, and they reflected light in ways that hurt to look at directly. Wings that could have blotted out the sun were folded against his massive body. His eyes were like stars, bright and terrible, filled with an intelligence that had watched civilizations rise and fall. When Ortax breathed, the temperature in the room spiked. When he moved his head to look at Danny, the floor trembled. Danny felt his knees buckle. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to hide, to do anything except stand here in front of this creature that could end his life with a thought. Hands grabbed his arms, holding him upright. "You dare." Orthax's voice was not spoken, but felt, resonating through the air itself. "You dare bring my child here after your kind stole it from me." "I did not steal anything," Danny managed to say, his voice barely a whisper. "I found Pip trapped and injured. I helped. That is all." "Lies. Humans do not help. They take. They destroy. They kill what they do not understand." "Then you do not understand humans very well." The words left Danny's mouth before he could stop them. The entire chamber went silent. Every dragon, every guard, everyone stared at him in shock. Ortax rose to his full height, and Danny realized he was about to die. But Pip moved faster. The hatchling threw itself in front of Danny, wings spread wide despite being far too small to actually shield him. Pip released a stream of flame toward Ortax, not in attack, but in challenge. The sound that came from the small dragon was fierce and unmistakable. Ortax stopped. His eyes widened in something that looked almost like surprise. Pip began making urgent sounds, complex vocalizations in the dragon language. The hatchling kept one wing stretched back, touching Danny, while facing its father with clear determination. "What is it saying?" Danny whispered to the nearest guard. The guard looked uncomfortable. "The hatchling claims you as clutch brother. It says you saved its life, fed it from your own supplies, protected it when you had nothing. It says you are family. Danny's heart nearly stopped. Family. Orthax lowered his massive head, bringing one enormous eye level with Danny and Pip. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter but no less powerful. Show me. Danny's hands shook as he pulled up the footage from his suit camera. He had recorded everything, partly as evidence, partly because he had gotten used to documenting salvage operations. The guards brought forward a display screen. The court watched in silence as the recording played. Danny finding Pip trapped under debris. The careful rescue. Sharing his ration bars with the starving hatchling. Days of footage showing Danny talking to Pip, working with the creature, clearly caring for its well-being despite having barely enough resources for himself. There was footage of Danny's broken heating unit, showing him shivering through the night while Pip slept warm nearby. Footage of Danny giving the hatchling the last of his food while he drank water to fill his own stomach. Footage of Pip helping repair the ship, the two of them working together like they had been partners for years. When the recording ended, the chamber remained quiet. Orthax straightened slowly. You had nothing, he said. Your vessel is barely functional. Your supplies nearly depleted. You were alone in the void. Yet you chose to share what little you had with a creature you did not know. It was the right thing to do, Danny said simply. The right thing. Orthax repeated the words as if tasting them. My child was not lost by accident, human. It was taken by those who wished to use it against me. They staged an attack, destroyed your station, and planned to retrieve the hatchling once your kind had fled the area. Danny felt cold despite the heat. I did not know. No, you simply saw a creature in need and helped it. You disrupted a plot centuries in the making by doing something my enemies did not anticipate. Orthax moved closer, his breath washing over Danny like a furnace wind. You saved my child's life, the last of my bloodline. The only thing in this galaxy I still love. I did what anyone should have done. That is where you are wrong, human. What you did is rare. So rare that in my 1,000 years, I have seen it perhaps a handful of times. Orthax's eyes narrowed. You came here knowing you would likely die. You came because keeping my child was wrong, even though returning it would cost you everything. Why? Danny looked at Pip, who was watching him with those intelligent, trusting eyes. He thought about all the conversations they had shared, all the small moments of connection. Because Pip deserves to be with family, Danny said. And because I could not live with myself knowing I kept someone's child from them. I lost my own family years ago. I know what that feels like. I would not wish that pain on anyone, not even someone who might kill me for trying to help. For a long moment, Orthax simply stared at him. Then the Dragon King, bowing his head before a human, was something no one in the chamber had ever expected to see. Danny heard gasps from the galleries above, whispers spreading through the assembled dragons like fire through dry grass. Orthax raised his head again, his star-bright eyes now holding something other than rage. Respect, perhaps, or recognition of something he thought he would never find in a lesser species. You have done my bloodline a service that cannot be measured in any currency known to this galaxy, Orthax said. By rights, you should be rewarded beyond imagination. Wealth, territory, technology, all of it yours for the asking. Danny swallowed hard. I do not want a reward. I just wanted to do the right thing. That itself is remarkable. Orthax shifted his massive form, lowering himself to a more conversational position. But there is a complication. My child has claimed you as clutch brother. Do you understand what this means? The guards said it means family. It means more than that. In dragon culture, the clutch brother bond is sacred. One who saves a hatchling and nurtures it becomes part of the family, responsible for that hatchling's well-being until it reaches maturity. The bond cannot be broken without dishonoring both parties. Danny looked down at Pip, who was now sitting at his feet, tail wrapped around his leg. I would never dishonor Pip. Then you face a choice, human. You may return to your kind with riches and my eternal gratitude, but the bond will be severed, and my child will feel that loss for the rest of its life. Orthax paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. Or you may stay. You may fulfill the role of clutch brother and remain with us until my child reaches maturity. 20 of your years, perhaps more. The chamber erupted in protest. Dragons roared their disapproval, their voices shaking the walls. The idea of a human living among them, being treated as one of them, was apparently too much for many to accept. Orthax silenced them with a sound that made Danny's bones ache. The choice is mine to offer and his to make. You will respect both. Danny's mind raced. Go back to his old life of scraping by, alone in the void with a failing ship and no one waiting for him anywhere. Or stay here, in a place where he was clearly not welcome, with the most dangerous beings in the galaxy. He looked at Pip again. The hatchling was watching him with those impossibly intelligent eyes, and Danny could see the hope there. The trust, the bond that had formed between them over 2 weeks of shared hardship and small kindnesses. If I stay, Danny said slowly, what happens to my ship? My things, they will be maintained or replaced as needed. You will want for nothing. And the colonies you are holding? The humans trapped in your blockade? Orthax's expression shifted to something almost like shame. They will be released immediately. The ultimatum is withdrawn. I have my child back, and I know now that humanity did not take it. There is no longer any reason for hostilities. Danny took a deep breath. His old life was not much of a life anyway. He had been drifting for years, going through motions, existing but not really living. These past 2 weeks with Pip had reminded him what it felt like to matter to someone, to have purpose beyond simple survival. I will stay, he said. Pip made a joyful sound and launched itself at Danny, nearly knocking him over. The hatchling's scales glowed brilliant gold, a color Danny had never seen before. He caught Pip and held on, feeling the creature's happiness through every trembling vibration of its body. Orthax watched them for a long moment. You surprised me, human. Most would choose wealth over responsibility. My name is Danny, and I already told you, you do not understand humans very well. Something that might have been amusement flickered in the Dragon King's eyes. Perhaps not, but I am willing to learn if you are willing to teach. The following days passed in a blur of new experiences. Danny was given quarters in the palace, rooms carved from crystal that caught light in impossible ways. They were far too large for him and uncomfortably hot, but he adapted. Pip stayed with him constantly, sleeping curled around him at night, following him through the corridors during the day. The other dragons kept their distance, watching with suspicion and curiosity in equal measure. Danny did not blame them. He was an outsider in every possible way, a fragile creature that could barely survive in their environment without assistance. But slowly, things began to change. Danny helped in small ways. He fixed equipment that the dragons found too delicate to handle with their massive claws. He offered suggestions for problems from a completely different perspective. He made Pip laugh, something the court had apparently never heard before, a sound of pure childish joy. Orthax observed it all. The Dragon King spent hours talking with Danny, asking questions about human culture, human thinking, human compassion. Why Danny had helped when it benefited him nothing. Why humans bonded with creatures different from themselves. Why they chose kindness when cruelty was easier. Danny answered honestly, explaining that not all humans were good, just as he imagined not all dragons were. But that most people, given the choice, wanted to help rather than harm. They wanted connection rather than isolation. They wanted to matter to someone. We are fragile, Danny explained one evening while Pip practiced flying between the palace spires. We know we are small and weak compared to most species in the galaxy. So we hold on to each other. We find strength in bonds, in family, in choosing to care about others even when it is hard. And that is what makes you strong, Orthax said quietly. Not your technology or your numbers, but this. He gestured to where Pip was showing off for Danny, doing aerial loops and clearly expecting praise. Good job, Pip, Danny called, and the hatchling's scales flashed with pride. Orthax made a sound that might have been a sigh. I spent centuries believing that power was enough. That fear ensured safety. But watching my child with you, I see something I lost long ago. What is that? Joy. Simple, uncomplicated joy. The Dragon King looked at Danny with those ancient eyes. You gave my child something I could not, despite all my power. You gave it happiness. Danny felt his throat tighten. Pip gave me something too. Purpose. A reason to keep going. Then perhaps this bond serves you both. That night, Orthax made an announcement to the assembled court. The human Danny Reeves was to be recognized as clutch brother to the royal heir. He was under the protection of the Dragon King himself. Any who harmed him would face Orthax's personal wrath. More importantly, Orthax declared that any human who showed such compassion to dragonkind would be granted safe passage through dragon space. It was a small gesture in the scope of galactic politics, but it was a beginning. Danny stood beside Pip during the announcement, the hatchling's wing draped over his shoulders. He thought about the cargo hauler gathering dust in the docking bay. 3 months had passed since Danny chose to stay, and the palace had become something unexpected. Home, he woke each morning to Pip curled around him, the dragon now large enough that its body covered most of the oversized bed. The hatchling had grown at an astonishing rate, already the size of a horse, with scales that shifted through colors like living rainbows. But despite the size, Pip was still young, still playful, still finding joy in the simplest things. Danny had established a routine. Mornings were for Pip's lessons with the dragon tutors, learning history and language and the complex politics of their civilization. Danny attended these sessions, both to support Pip and because he found the information fascinating. The tutors had stopped treating him like an unwelcome intrusion and started actually answering his questions. Afternoons were for flying practice. Pip would soar through the palace spires while Danny watched from the balconies, his heart in his throat every time the young dragon attempted a difficult maneuver. But Pip was a natural, moving through the air with grace that seemed impossible for something so large. Evenings belonged to just the two of them. They would sit in Danny's quarters, and he would tell stories about Earth, about the family he lost, about the small, beautiful things he remembered from his childhood. Pip listened to every word, sometimes resting its massive head in Danny's lap, a gesture of trust and affection that never failed to move him. Orthax joined them sometimes. The Dragon King had become less fearsome to Danny over time, though no less impressive. They talked about philosophy, about the nature of power and responsibility, about what it meant to be a leader. Danny offered perspectives that Orthax had never considered, and the ancient dragon actually listened. "You have changed, my child," Orthax said one evening. Pip laughs now, shows mercy, questions orders instead of simply obeying. Some in the court see this as weakness. "And what do you see?" Danny asked. "Growth, wisdom, the ability to lead with compassion rather than fear." Orthax fixed Danny with those starbright eyes. "I see a future king who might be better than I ever was." The words hung in the air between them. Danny had not thought much about the future, about what would happen when Pip reached maturity and he was no longer needed as clutch brother. The idea of leaving felt wrong now, but staying forever seemed impossible. "What happens when Pip is grown?" Danny asked quietly. "That is Pip's choice to make, not mine. The bond between you is real. It will not simply disappear because 20 years have passed." Orthax shifted his massive bulk, his voice carrying something that sounded almost like hope. "Perhaps you will choose to stay. Perhaps my child will have both a father and a clutch brother to help guide it. I am not exactly qualified to help guide the future ruler of the Dragon Empire. You are more qualified than you know. You have already taught Pip something I never could, that strength and kindness are not opposites. That power used with compassion is the truest form of leadership." Before Danny could respond, Pip came bounding into the room, scales flashing with excitement. The young dragon had something clutched carefully in its claws. "Look what I made." Pip's voice was still high and young, but the language was clear. The dragon had been practicing human speech for weeks now, determined to communicate with Danny in his own language. Pip held out a small sculpture, made from twisted metal and polished stone. It depicted two figures, a dragon and a human, standing side by side. The craftsmanship was crude but earnest, made with claws not designed for such delicate work. "It is us," Pip said proudly. "You and me, together." Danny took the sculpture with shaking hands. "Pip, this is beautiful. You keep it, so you remember that you are family, that you belong here." Danny pulled the young dragon into a hug, or as much of a hug as he could manage given the size difference. I will never forget that. Ever. Ortax watched them with an expression Danny had learned to recognize. A father's love, mixed with pride, and perhaps a touch of regret for the years he had spent isolated and alone. The next day, Danny received an unexpected visitor. A human ship had been granted permission to approach the palace, carrying an ambassador from Earth's government. They wanted to meet the man who had changed the political landscape of the galaxy by feeding a hungry dragon. Danny met with the ambassador in one of the formal receiving rooms, feeling profoundly out of place in the ceremonial robes the court had insisted he wear. The ambassador, a stern woman named Director Hayes, looked at him with undisguised curiosity. "You are aware that you have become something of a legend among humans," she said. "The scavenger who befriended a dragon king. Stories are being told about you in every colony. I just did what felt right. That simple act has opened doors we thought would remain closed forever. Dragon space is no longer completely forbidden. Cultural exchanges are being discussed. Scientific cooperation. All because you chose to help a creature in need." Danny shifted uncomfortably. "I never meant to change anything political. I just wanted to help Pip. That is exactly why it worked." Director Hayes leaned forward. "I have been authorized to offer you anything you want. A position in the diplomatic corps. Wealth beyond measure. A colony of your own. Name it, and Earth will provide." Danny thought about his old life. The loneliness. The constant struggle. The feeling that he did not matter to anyone. Then he thought about Pip, probably waiting impatiently for him to finish this meeting so they could go flying. About Ortax, who had started asking his opinions on matters of state. About the palace staff, who now greeted him by name. About feeling needed and valued and part of something larger than himself. "Thank you," Danny said, "but I already have everything I want right here." Director Hayes blinked in surprise. "You're choosing to stay? Permanently? Pip is my family. This is my home now. I appreciate Earth's offer, but my place is here." The ambassador studied him for a long moment. Then she smiled, a genuine expression that softened her stern features. "Then I will tell Earth that their wayward son has found where he belongs. And I will tell them that humanity's greatest ambassador to the Dragon Empire is a cargo hauler who chose kindness over profit." After she left, Danny found Pip waiting on the balcony, wings spread to catch the warm air currents. "Ready to fly?" the young dragon asked. "Always." Pip leaped from the balcony, and Danny watched from the safety of the railing, his heart soaring with his friend. Ortax joined him, the massive dragon king settling beside the tiny human in comfortable silence. "Do you have regrets?" Ortax asked. Danny looked at Pip performing loops in the sky, scales flashing gold and blue and green in the sunlight. He thought about the sculpture sitting in his quarters, about the family he had found in the most unexpected place, about the purpose that filled his days now. "Not even one," he said. Across the galaxy, the story spread. The human who fed a lonely dragon hatchling every day, never knowing their father was the most feared king in existence. The simple act of compassion that bridged species and changed the course of civilizations. But to Danny, it was never about the grand gestures or the political implications. It was about a small creature that needed help and a lonely man who chose to give it. It was about finding family in the most unlikely places and learning that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the smallest acts of kindness. Pip called to him from the sky, an invitation to come closer to the edge so Danny could see the new maneuver the young dragon had learned. Danny moved to the railing and called back encouragement, his voice mixing with Pip's joyful roars and Orthax's rumbling laughter. He was home.